I just love destruction. I just love this destruction process because it gives me these ghosts to follow. Art's all about taking chances. Art's about experimentation for me. Boy, you can really see those brush strokes from the gesso in there. Look at those drips.
Welcome back to another episode of the Wet Pastelist. Today I am playing God. I'm taking something and making it into my own image. By remaking this copy using alcohol and clear gesso, we take some of the essence that I saw during the plein air study and we turn it into something that is my own and my own vision. So not only will this episode talk about the two wet techniques, alcohol and clear gesso, you can see how you can make copies. And that was the goal of the original, was to make copies and learn about a different color palette. But once I learned that, I still like the image of the meadow looking through trees. So with this particular piece, I wanted to make it my own rather than destroy it all the way and go from just the ghosts of something that wasn't even there before. This time I'm going to go with ghost, but I'm going to follow those ghosts and keep the essence of the original plein air thought. This remake, I'm using alcohol, and I'm using some small brushes because I'm going to try, unlike others where I use a big brush and try to destroy the painting. In this particular case, I am going to try to retain some of these shapes. This is a copy of, well, it's not a direct copy. I actually started this in plein air, and I loved this color scheme that Wolf Kahn had on one of his paintings. And I kind of followed the color scheme and his design of using these kind of blue-gray trees, or what I call a tree screen, in the foreground with the reds and yellows in the background. And that's what I was looking at on this scene. And it turned out too much like almost a direct copy of his because I was referring to one of Wolf Kahn's books, or a book of Wolf Kahn paintings. So I was trying to learn this palette. This spring I went out with, I call them the boys, the guys who I go out to paint with. I don't get out near as much because my wife and I decided to move. But I just love this, this palette, and I wanted to try to learn it. So that's where this painting came from. And I did not brush off, like another demo, I did not brush off this pastel. I'm using this alcohol to wet the pastel and make the pigment accessible to my brushes so that I can go back in here and do some blending. Now, I'm going to try to make this tree screen, which, as I said, I was on location in plein air. It just turned out very, very close to the Wolf Kahn painting. And that's what made me want to, hey, I think I'll just do a copy today. And that's how that ended up. Now I've switched to the smaller brush to get in between these things. In previous destruction processes, I just blend all this pastel, let's just call it alcohol pigment, because that's really what we're creating, is we're creating a pigment out of that pastel that's left on the surface. And that pigment is being dissolved with my brush and being reutilized and redistributed. So this should make it my own painting, even though it was derived originally as a study of the color schemes. The color scheme will change. I'm not going to go back. I might go back in there and use some of those yellows and red oranges, but unlike Wolf Kahn, my paintings tend to have a little bit more color harmony between one another, a little bit more of a tonalistic approach of the old school. A lot of his paintings are tonalistic, but he kept the separation of colors much more than what I tend to do. The paintings that I have separated the colors like this, they're less satisfying because it's not me. There's only one Wolf Kahn, and there's only one me. And if I try to paint like Wolf Kahn, then I'm not painting my paintings. But it's okay to copy. It's okay to learn color palettes by copying, and that's what this originally was. Now I have to make it mine. And I'm certain that somebody would have a big old debate, you know, is it really yours since you copied Wolf Kahn's colors and it came out really close to his, even though you were in a plein air and looking through a tree screen or pasture behind? I think it is. And besides, I'm painting for myself. I'm not painting for somebody else. And if I learn from the Wolf Kahn, I've switched brushes again back to this. If I learn from that, and from that derives another painting, I'm perfectly fine saying it was derived from a Wolf Kahn, but, you know, homaged de Wolfie. I'll leave that up to the art experts who want to argue that. I mean, who am I to compete with Wolfie? So the goal here is to mix those. I'm getting some lights and darks, and we'll let this dry. Now that this is dried, you can see some of that gray, and see this is really less vibrant than what the Wolf Kahn colors were. But I really let this dissolve. A lot of excess alcohol has dissolved that tree line that was behind this tree screen in the front, but you can still see the tree screen. Okay, so I just love this destruction process because it gives me these ghosts to follow. And that's what will make it mine, is these ghosts and just my reaction to what is on this page. I've got to react to what's on the page. If I don't react, then I don't have my emotions into this, and that's what I'm after. I just love that. But there's a little texture underneath here, but I got to get more texture on there to do what I want to do. So I'm going to paint this with gesso. Okay, using my chip brush, I'm putting, it looks like, this is clear gesso. It looks milky, but it dries almost clear. It's a frosty finish, but it's going to give me, with this chip brush, lots of brush strokes in there. Now, if I try to brush back and forth, then it will dissolve that alcohol finish. That alcohol is acting like a fixative. It's holding those colors on there. If I didn't want to take a chance of losing these little details in here, I would spray this with a fixative, something like Spectrafix or any workable fixative, and then put the gesso over it. That would fix those colors some. But even doing that, if you put something wet over the alcohol or a fixative that has been sprayed on, and you scrub back and forth with brush strokes, you'll dissolve that little bit of fixative finish and destroy those details regardless. So the goal here is to create texture. And the less that I can brush back into these areas, the better I will keep those ghosts and images underneath here. Those drips, I should still be able to see and follow some of those drip ghosts and things that the alcohol created for us. So that's one of the reasons that I work in so many different layers, is I'm after that texture. So I'm going to be recreating, but in this one I'm destroying and revising during the recreation and the resurrection of this into, hopefully, a new piece. We'll see. Always chance, and that's what I love, is the chance. One of the advantages of doing those color studies on a smaller piece of paper is that you get to see how the construction process might go together. Now you see this is much lighter than these rusty oranges, but remember, red was part of my palette, so red will go back over that to darken that down. And I'm going very, very light again because I want those darks underneath to show through for now. So I'm following these ghosts to try to get some of those areas in there. I lost the drips, and so I might have another destruction process to reestablish some of those. We'll just have to wait and see. The painting is going to tell me what it needs. I get a little bit of that up in there so that when I mix that sky, these corners, photographers used to call that burning in the corners. But that burning in the corners created a little bit of a vignette effect. And I'm just hitting this very lightly. I'm not rubbing hard. I'm just trying to fill in a little bit because there's quite a bit of contrast between this kind of rusty and this orange. I will get close to that by adding the red, but I know the red's going to go back over some of the same areas that this rusty orange was. So it's going to leave maybe too big of dark red orange in there, and by just going lightly over and not using a pipe insulation or anything like that to really rub it in, but just to cover up some of that really dark color will maybe help it in the end or make a little less work. All right, now this is my not homemade color, but I want that to be for some of these limbs and branches that will be stuck out on some of these trees that are in the tree screen. Some of you have heard me talk about tree screens. If you're new to the channel, a tree screen is basically where I live, there's a lot of flat lands, and you could do open fields and big skies, but I love trees. Trees are like one of my favorite things, and there's these trees that grow up in the fence rows, and they screen off the background, and the shapes, the negative and positive shapes created by these trees interrupting the light areas that are behind them in the sky, that to me is as much interest as if I lived where there were hills and valleys and streams crisscrossing the foreground of a painting. So to me, tree screens are just part of where I live. You've got to be true to yourself. Come on. You've got to figure out what is your subject. You've got to figure out how you're going to handle that subject. Because if you don't, you'll end up like me copying that Wolfcon palette. I copied it for a reason, to learn how he used those blue grays and those oranges together. But now, this painting's got to be mine. I learned from that. I'm destroying a copy of a con in order to come up with something that is more like me. I've got to get my personality in these paintings, and tree screens are something that I just really enjoy doing. So now you can see some shapes of trees. You're going to get a little bit more, probably some things coming up to here. Since this was a really brushy area, the bottom of the trees aren't so transparent in a fence row. This was a meadow back in behind the farm with a row of trees off in the distance and the sky. And this was just like this row of trees, this is the row of trees that was on this side of the meadow, but they were see-through. They had a transparency to them that the trees off in the distance were much thicker. So it's that transparency I'm after, to see through there. And it's the shapes. This is that homemade pastel. That is a little bit lighter, and I can define some of these edges of some of these trees up in here. This will get covered over. I'm just trying to put in some kind of place markers, and I'm being very careful not to press too hard because I want layers. I want that texture to come through. So just by getting a few little outlines of where some of these branches and things might be, I can get some blues and violets in there and really make a lot more interest than what you see with this underpainting. And that's what this is basically, is it's a new underpainting after destruction of the original. I'm reconstructing the underpainting, and we might destroy it again. And then when we reach the end process, we are doing a resurrection of the original painting in a different form. This is just a little light again. Each time I do this, I'm filling in a few of those dark areas, but I'm still keeping some of those dark areas to pop through, because that's going to create that layering and interest that I'm looking for. But boy, you can really see those brush strokes from the gesso in there. I really needed that gesso layer to get that interest in these areas. This red over here, remember how I was telling you that you saw that this kind of rusty orange was up in here, and this is the red I was talking about that I knew would darken it down. And you can see some of those really dark areas in the underpainting are blending well with this. Eventually this will fade off into a brighter orange, and I'm just following the ghost. There's some drips that I can see behind some of this. There's some old tree stems that were from the original painting that are showing through. And then of course the texture of the new gesso. Oh, that's gorgeous over that rusty and those grays. So light. This is really just a feather touch. Just enough to drag some brighter color through there. Those two shades of gray that I created, these little bunches of trees that were just kind of place markers, they're mixing really well with this. And there's getting to be a lot of fuzz. That's the painting the air. I like to paint the air. That's so much darker, so much subdued than the con palette. Again, I'm not trying to recreate the con palette. I've already done that. I've already learned from that. This is me. This is me trying to create something I like. Now, before I lose sight, this is my 1/3 mark here. Intersections of 1/3 are right around the base of that tree line in the distance. Before I lose sight of where that little bit of a brighter spot is, I'm going to over exaggerate that bright spot a little bit here with this. But blending in the edges eventually and everything will get me closer to what we want as far as this lighter area. Anything I put over the top of that will have its own color to each side but blend with this yellow. So I'm thinking ahead, I'm pre-visualizing. Some of you have heard in past videos I talk about pre-visualization, and that's what planning ahead really is that you're pre-visualizing. You know your materials well enough, you've worked with them well enough and long enough and as often as you can, that now you have an idea that when you put something someplace and you put another color over it, what it's going to do. Constantly destroying and remaking and reestablishing all the way through. Construction, destruction, construction, destruction. Reconstruction until we finally resurrect this thing at the end. Or it dies. A lot of times they just die. And we've got some light coming through these trees. Try to reestablish some of those individual tree areas. Probably with some violets, I'll really diminish those this line of trees off in the distance. They were really big. I think I'm going to diminish them so I can get the contrast of the leaves and everything. When your work becomes too precious to destroy, just as I did wiping my hand across there, then you haven't reached a point where you're willing to experiment. You're scared. You still have a... And I was frightened. I was always frightened. It's like, man, that's the best I've ever done. Oh, if I change that, there were areas of paintings where, especially when I did human figures, there were areas of painting, it was like I knew I needed to fix the other area, but boy, that hand was so good. Well, the hand was the only good part of the picture by the time I was done. So you've got to get to the point where you know your materials well enough and you're willing to take a chance. Art's all about taking chances. Art's about experimentation for me. So the painting doesn't always have to be a success. What has to be a success is my day. Did I put in an honest day's work on painting? Or did I hold back? Destroy, recreate, destroy, recreate. Now going back over these blues with those grays is going to, especially that homemade gray up in these lighter areas, I need to get this sky lightened up some. So I'm pushing a little harder in between these trees to get a little more light pastel, that when I go over those areas I can create that lighter sky coming across, and there'll be just a hint of some violets in those that tree line that was across here, but much smaller. The fuzzier I can keep this, the more abstract this landscape becomes, the happier I'll be. But sometimes they take off and they want more realism. But today, it just doesn't seem like a realistic day to me. Hey, I'm living in dreamland, kids. I'm living in dreamland. But there's some really neat things happening in all these little spaces. And I've been making broad strokes, like boom, boom, boom. I think you'll see me later on get down into the nitties and the gritties and do a little bit more mark making and less paint strokes. When we pastelists say we paint with pastel, we're doing this, the side of the pastel. When we mark make, we're making marks like this with the end and the sharp edges of the pastel. One's not better than the other. It's just different, and it's different times that you use them. Now you see me getting a little bit more into making a few more of those marks. I'm just kind of testing this. This is a blue-green, almost a light turquoise. And I want to see what that will do if I have the edges of something there that's gray. So I'm going to leave that on there. I'm not going to blend it much because I used a little bit more mark making. And I'm going to go in here with some yellows and just a very pale pink, which gives me a little bit of a red. And it's showing through some of that orange that I'll be using down in here. So it's a way to marry the oranges I use there with the brighter sky. And this is a very light pale yellow, got a lot of white in it, and I'm bringing it down to what will be the top of those trees. But I'm doing this around where I did that mark making, just to see how these colors will marry together. This is kind of like an experimental patch. This is a really strong blue violet, and I'm pre-visualizing these going gray, so having a more chromatic violet into that light sky will hopefully brighten it up. And now, see, that's a very dark, but when I go over it with this kind of pinkish violet that I used up in here that turned just kind of milky, and see, when I use it just over that orange and go like that, it just deadens out and comes forward. And I want it to come forward because I want it to be bright, so I've got to have a contrast between these trees that are in the tree screen and the bright sky. And yellow and violet make what? They make a violet gray. And remember, the sky doesn't go straight up behind from those trees. The sky comes out towards us. I'm not putting this violet on strong enough to kill that yellow. And this is back to that kind of peachy red violet that I put in there that turned dead over the orange. See, with those underpaintings and those undertones, we get some really interesting layers going on with this texture. Now the sky is going a little bit green on me. Using this red with that yellow creates a nice vibrant orange. As that meadow goes from the foreground back to those trees, it becomes paler. And I love this color over those violet trees. Just kind of like highlights hitting the trees in the background. And it's all staying abstract. It's all painting the air in this particular case. Okay, I'm going to continue this process of creating these trees over this meadow with some light on the meadow and the sky. I'm going to try to get the sky this way, and the foreground goes a little darker, and then I'll reestablish these tree stems and limbs once I get the meadow close to where I want it. So I may fast forward here in a moment, but at this point you can just watch as I start to adjust some of these colors. Really nice layers going on in there. It's much more the feeling that I remember when I painted the underpainting and the con color study in plein air. This is probably 90, maybe 95% done. I'm going to put it on my fermentation wall. I'm suspecting there's some more work that needs to be done. But this gives you a good idea of how the alcohol, using alcohol to remake things after the pastel is on there, and liquidizing the pastel powder rather than scraping it off and starting over. And unlike previous examples, I was much more judicious because I wanted to keep that feeling of the tree screen looking through into the meadow and off into the distance. Thanks for following along. Hopefully you got something out of that. Please hit the subscribe button or the like button if you're already subscribed. It goes a long way to helping others find the content. So until next time, everybody, happy painting and so long.